This is the Project Management Podcast. We bring project management topics to beginners and experts. Find us on the web at www.thepmpodcast.com or send your emails to pmpodcast@gmail.com.
Hello and welcome to episode number 118. I am Cornelius Fichtner. This is the Project Management Podcast for the 5th of May 2009. Nice to have you with us. First of all, let me begin by saying that I'm almost finished with that mountain of work that was on top of me here the first 4 months of this year. As you may know, the new PMBOK guide was released in December of last year, and I was working on updating a large number of PMP exam-related products to this new standard. And those of you preparing for the PMP exam, you can look forward to a number of PMP-related giveaways here on the Project Management Podcast. But today, we want to discuss culture. Many aspects of culture are invisible, yet culture has an enormous impact on our projects. If ignored, these aspects can lead to misunderstanding, stress, and conflict. Alternatively, if attention is given to the invisible aspects that we have here, it can enhance productivity, improve project teamwork, and create more joy on the job. Dealing with cross-cultural issues on a multinational project can be like trying to control an invisible elephant. The issues are real and crucial as we journey into the new era of increasing globalization. That's why I'm very happy to welcome Tom Verghese from culturalsynergies.com on the Project Management Podcast for this episode. We are going to discuss what culture is, how cultural awareness and cultural intelligence will help you to better deal with your project teams, and Tom will give you some very specific tips on how to increase cultural synergies on your projects. We are also giving away a number of goodies that Tom is offering to our listeners. First of all, we are giving away 2 copies of his book, The Invisible Elephant: Exploring Cultural Awareness. Then we have a double CD titled Raising Your Cultural IQ. And we have 1 audio CD and 1 video DVD of his presentation titled Sourcing Across Cultures, which is especially interesting if you're in charge of purchasing on your projects. One of the books and the video DVD is reserved for our premium listeners. Everybody who is a subscriber of the premium podcast, you are automatically added to this contest. And everyone who would like a chance to win the other items, well, you need only send an email to me. Send it to pmpodcast@gmail.com, put your name, town and country where you come from into the body, and use culture as the subject of the email. The email must reach me before Thursday, May 21st, 2009, and of course if you are a premium listener, you can double your chances and send in an email as well. But now, let's move on to the interview with Tom Verghese. Tom is an author, presenter, executive coach, consultant, and director of Cultural Synergies. His consulting expertise extends globally. During his more than 17 years of consulting, he has completed assignments in more than 30 countries and has had extensive experience working with diverse range of people from different cultures from all over the world. Tom's specialist area is working with individuals, teams and organizations on improving performance when working with people from different cultures or on raising their cultural intelligence. Some of his clients include Disney, ANZ Bank, Deutsche Bank, Microsoft, Cadbury, Schweppes, Sara Lee, Autoliv, Novo Nordisk, and the University of Melbourne. Here we go. Enjoy the interview. Hello, Tom, and welcome to the program.
Thank you, Cornelius. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, we're glad to have you. Your latest book is called The Invisible Elephant: Exploring Cultural Awareness. Why did you choose this title?
Well, I chose this title because I like to think of culture as an elephant. It's a metaphor for culture.
Yes.
So if you think about an elephant, An elephant is big, it's huge, it tends to move around slowly, it's an ancient animal. And culture is also very similar. It's big, it's huge, and it tends to move very slowly. And many a time when we are dealing with people of different cultures, it becomes actually difficult when we're having issues with them to work out, is it really their personality or is it really their culture? And it's difficult to raise it as a topic of conversation. So many a time the culture is invisible. We just don't see it.
Okay, then. And so what then is cultural awareness? And I've also seen you call it cultural intelligence. Same thing, different thing?
Well, cultural awareness is really about how do I become more aware, firstly, about my own culture, because we all have a culture, Cornelius, right?
Yes.
We carry our culture with us. Whether we are cognizant of it or not, we just take it with us everywhere. So how do I become aware of my culture, and how do I become aware of people I'm dealing with who come from a different culture? So that's really about being aware of cultural differences. Cultural intelligence, on the other hand, is having, firstly, the knowledge on how do I deal with people of different cultures. Secondly, how do I have the skill set to deal with other cultures? And thirdly, how do I have the motivation to actually want to be interested in learning more about it, and also having the interest to do things that will make it more culturally appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
And the other aspect that's involved in cultural intelligence is what we call the metacognition, which is the ability to step out of yourself and look at the interaction through a lens, through a cultural lens.
Right. You mentioned culture is something that we carry within us.
Yeah.
How is culture then defined in a person in that sense?
Okay.
What makes up culture for a person?
What makes up culture? Well, one of the most popular definitions was created by a Dutch anthropologist called Gert Hofstede. And he defines culture as the mental programming of a group of people. So it's your mindset, it's the way of thinking. Okay? Another definition of culture is just the way we do things around here. It's usually unspoken, it's all the norms, and it's very tacit. So, people within a culture tend to know their culture. And I tend to look at culture as very much as the lens through which you look out at the world.
Okay. Let's move on to project management here and look a little bit about how cultural awareness and also cultural intelligence, how important it is in project management. So let's start at the very basic level here. How will cultural awareness, how will cultural intelligence help somebody who is leading a project, help them successfully manage that project team that makes up the group of people working together here?
Okay. Well, firstly, it will help if your project managers are running global projects.
Yes.
So that's an imperative. In other words, if you're running a project within your own country, of course there may be possibilities that you'll be dealing with people of different cultures within your own culture, within your own country. However, there will be a commonality of cultures. The challenge is when you're running global projects where your project spans culture, distance, and time. Cultural awareness then becomes really important, because my experience of working with project managers has been the project methodology is very sound. They have their milestones, they have their objectives, they know what they need to do, they set up the timelines, and so on and so forth. The problem occurs usually it's with the team who is actually fulfilling the objectives and the timelines. So it's the people part of the projects.
And how would you go about then making people aware of this situation? Hey, we have a group here that's spanning the globe. We have different cultures that we're bringing together. How do you bring them together as a group in understanding this?
Yep, that's a good question. So I think one of the things we need to firstly realize is when we talk about culture here, we are referring to a group phenomena. Okay?
Yes.
So we have national culture. So for instance, we have Australian culture, American culture, Swiss culture, German culture, French culture, which is a group of people within that particular geographic boundary. Then you have organizational culture. So if you work for a certain company, every organization has a culture, which is the way they do things, right? So, IBM talks about the IBM way, the Hewlett-Packard way, there's the Shell culture, there's the GM culture, there's the Toyota culture. So everyone within that organization shares that culture. And then there's obviously your personal culture, which is, you as the individual, your values, your upbringing, etc. And most times you are, the most relaxed within your own family background. So if you think about that as three circles, three intersecting circles, the hub of that is where you are as an individual. Now, when you're running a project, if you think about it as a project, most organizations focus on organizational culture because national culture is too difficult to deal with. So they say, well, we have an organizational culture that will bind us all together, that will keep us all similar. The problem becomes, though, that the organizational culture is obviously affected by national cultures. So for a project manager, say if you're a US-based project manager and you're running a project that involves dealing with people, say, from India or China or France or Singapore, Korea, things that you want to be thinking about is, well, firstly, communication styles. When does yes mean yes, for instance? Because in many cultures, a yes will also mean maybe. A yes could also mean I've heard you, and I may not quite agree with you. So it's making those distinctions around that. It's being aware of those things.
Let me go back to the three circles that you drew there. One around me, one around the organization, one around my country. In regards to project management, wouldn't there be a fourth one as well? The project team as a group that comes together, that works for a certain time, maybe 1 year, 2 years on this project. They build their own project-related culture that may be separate from everything else?
Absolutely. And so you will find that team will have a project that is a subset of the organizational culture. So if you look at organizational culture as a big circle, within that culture, you will have, say, finance will have a particular culture.
Yes.
HR will have a particular culture. So project management will have a particular culture. And the team itself will also have a project culture. So I think you're correct on that, Cornelius.
All right. So how then do you take those team members, in particular their perception, right, in regards to culture, their awareness, and you bring them together in such a way that they appreciate the differences that they have as a team, as a cultural group there, rather than fearing that, oh God, we're different than you are there in Singapore, and we now have to work with each other. How do you deal with this?
Okay. Well, I think one of the first things that the project manager has to do when looking at a global project is being aware of the impact of culture. So culture influences the way we think, Cornelius.
Yes.
And the way we think influences how we behave. So a project manager who's running a global team, one of the first things they need to obviously understand is in most project teams, most project members will work in a matrix type structure, right?
Most often, yes.
Yeah, so you have a hardline reporting structure, and then you have a soft line, so a dotted line. So the whole idea becomes, how do I take this into consideration when I'm pulling the team together? We have our tasks. Now, what are some of the things we need to be aware of? And cultural differences, if you can look at cultural differences as a way of leveraging the strengths of the team. So in other words, what we really want is to make the best of the differences. It's an asset, but you need to spend time thinking about it. So therefore, some of the key strategies when you're putting a project team together would be establishing some norms right at the front, i.e., how are we going to work together? How do we deal with things like conflict? What are the agreements regarding timelines? How do we go about celebrating success? Now, these are some of the things that you want to establish right up front, especially when you're dealing virtually, when you're working virtually. and you have distance and time zones to consider.
Right. Now, let me bring the culture into this right now.
Yep.
For me, as somebody coming from a Germanic background, right, this is nothing unusual, right? Straight to the point, I'm telling you, we are going to deal with our differences, with our conflicts like this.
Yep.
If I have people from a high context culture on my team, and right off the bat, from the very beginning, I'm saying, okay, conflict, we are going to address conflict like this. Aren't I causing a problem here? Aren't I disregarding their culture?
Indeed, you are.
From a point of view?
Yes. So therefore, maybe a better way of doing that would be actually asking the question of how do we deal with conflict?
Right.
So my preference, if I'm speaking from your perspective, my preference would be to deal with it directly because that's my style.
Mm-hmm.
But I understand that for a lot of people it's not. So how should we deal with it? So it's about having the dialogue. It's about having the conversation. Because, so just for argument's sake, let's say we have on your project team someone from Japan. And traditionally speaking, the Japanese avoid conflict, right? They don't like to deal with conflict directly. They are circular, and consent is really important. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody in Japan is like that. You may have someone on your project team who is Japanese, but who has spent a lot of time in the West.
Yes.
And they would have a different mindset, right? So even though they're Japanese in name and stature, their thinking style is different, and they may very well favor a direct style of conflict. However, if the person in your project team is what we call a typical Japanese, then the challenge becomes, as a project leader, how do I engage in ways that that will raise the conflict in a way that's comfortable also for the person from Japan. And that may be through, using metaphors, analogies, taking a little bit more time to explore the issues and things like that.
In the end, the idea definitely is that we want to help our team grow together.
Absolutely.
Increase
Absolutely.
cohesiveness there, right?
Absolutely.
So, is there something specific that you do in order to make this happen so that the team grows its culture? Or is it just something, that kind of happens?
No, I think you have to specifically take some steps. So you need to be conscious about it. So, if we just take a step back from this, Cornelius, and think about diverse teams, right? Multicultural teams. In terms of, I'm sure your listeners will be familiar with the stages of team development, Tuckman's model.
Forming, storming, norming, performing.
Yeah, norming, storming, performing, yeah?
Yes.
So, when you look at a multicultural team, the initial parts, the forming and the storming take longer than a culturally homogeneous team. So you need to spend time in the early stages looking at how do we build relationships, how do we build trust, because once you have that happening, then you will get very good results. There's a lot of research that shows that a multicultural team will outperform a culturally homogeneous team. However, the period of time in team formation in the early stages is longer. And if you don't do that well, the team will not succeed. The team will fall aside. So it's the early parts that you need to spend time thinking about how do we do this? How do we focus on this? What are some of the tools that we need to be using here? And how do we raise this in a way that makes sense?
This might of course, be a good moment to bring in somebody like yourself, somebody who knows how to bring teams together, who understands cultural awareness, cultural intelligence, and hire somebody as a consultant if the project is large enough, right?
That's right. If the project is large enough, to come in as a process consultant to give suggestions on that, and which is something that I do. My expertise is not understanding the fundamentals of the project, but it's more on the process. Absolutely. So I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I have a coaching client who's an American who's based in Singapore, and he's here on a 3-year assignment, and he was having a call yesterday with his team in Korea. And one of the things when we were talking about, I asked him, okay, so what's your strategy going to be in engaging the Koreans? Okay. So it's actually thinking about how do I do this? Because, his style is to be very forthright, direct, and to the point. And I was suggesting to him that doing it only in that style may not get the desired results with the Koreans. So I think, Cornelius, it's a way of how do we, in fact, expand our repertoire of behaviors.
Understood. And that's a great segue, because the repertoire of our behaviors, I think, very well explained in your book. Again, it's called The Invisible Elephant, Exploring Cultural Awareness. Let's talk a little bit about what my listeners would get out of reading your book. So they're all project managers. They have to manage these diverse teams. If they choose to read your book, what will they learn from it?
I think they will learn a couple of things. I think the first thing that they will learn is actually the importance that culture plays in the success of a project team. So whether you look at national culture or team culture, what is the importance of that and why do you need to spend time on that? The second thing that they will learn is, in fact, what are the differences and similarities of people from different cultures? So in other words, when we look at cultures, what are some of the values in a particular culture, and how do I, in fact, deal with that? And the third thing is around about strategies on how to deal with it. Okay? So let me give you an example on one aspect of cultural difference, which is about hierarchy and equality. In many cultures, hierarchy is valued. In other words, in those cultures, we would value titles, we would value age, tenure in a company, seniority, and, we look at society as being vertical. Other cultures value equality, egalitarianism. So we try to flatten it. It's much more a horizontal culture. So as a project manager, let's say I'm a project manager, I'm dealing with somebody who is in a hierarchical culture, and I'm asking for feedback on, maybe we're brainstorming, I'm asking for feedback on a certain situation. I need to be aware that somebody who comes from a hierarchical culture will tend not to disagree with me because they will be too respectful of my seniority. I need to be aware that somebody who comes from a hierarchical culture will not challenge me or will find it very difficult to do that. So a project manager who's culturally intelligent will look for ways on how do I raise the challenges, how do I listen to different opinions in a way that makes it easier for them to say that. So that would be another benefit you'd get from reading the book.
Great. Let's close this out with a little bit of advice from your end here. And then let me ask you this question. So what is your advice to a project manager who has just been handed a new project? How should he or she go about identifying areas on the project where culture could play a role? Of course, we are assuming here, it's a multicultural project, people spanning the globe. So identify areas where the culture would play a role, and then how do you come up with strategies to minimize negative effects, enhance positive effects? How do you go about doing that?
Okay. Well, one of the first things I would do is obviously when you get your list of people on the project, you've got your milestones, I would look at the list of people and identify which parts of the world they're from. Because if they're spanning the globe, which parts of the world are they from? And then, what would be some of the possible values and mindsets that they would be bringing into the project? So we're making some assumptions here as a project manager. Okay. The next thing I would then do is, obviously, in my initial stages, I'm going to be talking about the project because that is what binds us together. We are all involved in this project, and it is the success of the project that we're working towards. We then talk about what are some of the issues that could possibly come into play. So we may use a tool like, for instance, the cultural mirror. The cultural mirror is a tool that's in my book, and it talks about the 9 dimensions of culture. And you could use that as a tool, as an assessment tool, to get people to plot themselves on this and then use that as a framework of discussion. So in other words, make the visible Make the invisible visible. Make the elephant visible. Make it explicit. When you're working with people from your own culture, there are lots of assumptions we make. But when you're working with people across cultures, you really need to check your assumptions. And that will engage the conversation. That will start the dialogue.
Wonderful, wonderful. Tom, thank you so much. The book is once again called The Invisible Elephant, Exploring Cultural Awareness. Thank you very much for being here with us today, and thank you for your time.
You're most welcome, Cornelius. Thanks very much. Bye for now.
And that was our discussion with Tom Verghese on cultural awareness. Don't forget, if you want to participate in the book, CD and DVD video giveaway, to send me an email before May 21st, 2009. And of course, our premium listeners, you're automatically entered into those goodies that are reserved especially for you. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. And if you like the podcast, why not forward it to your friends, co-workers, project management colleagues, or anyone else who might enjoy it. As always, you can find us on the web at thepmpodcast.com, and if you are a project manager who wants to become a PMP, then the easiest way to do so is with our sister podcast, the Project Management Prepcast, and study for the exam by listening to over 90 podcast episodes from pmprepcast.com. And if you are already a PMP, then stop by at pmlectures.com, where we go beyond just giving you PDUs. We give you exclusive training from the brightest minds in project management today. Please send your emails to pmpodcast@gmail.com, and when you write, yes, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this. Here are once again the 6 stages of team development that Tom mentioned during the interview. They are forming, storming, norming, performing, dissolving, and blaming. Until next time.